Hey, welcome back everyone. If you're new to this channel, my name is Alex. This video today is going to be centered around everything I read this September, my first month back at school. This is going to be a little bit of a more difficult video to organize, and I apologize that during these school months, the videos might not be quite as entertaining as when I'm reading in the summer or winter break or whatever, just because there's a lot of extra reading I have to do, whether it's for the literary journal I'm working for, whether it's just short stories for classes that I won't exactly be able to review. I am going to try to make a little short story video just because I've been getting a lot of great recommendations. My professor this year is awesome for creative writing, and I kind of feel bad with how much time I'm spending in his office hours, but we've gone over a lot of short stories. I've actually got a couple books that he gave me, and I definitely do want to kind of discuss those. So I'll probably do a separate little short story thing for ones that I'm really enjoying, and ones that I maybe wouldn't be reading otherwise, like the George Saunders and Claire Keegan stuff that I'm always kind of going through. So yeah, but I figured I would start with the one thing I've been reading on my own, which is Letters to a Young Poet by Rainer Maria Rilke. I have loved it, loved it, loved it. It took way longer than it should have. I started this 6 days before school, was basically done with it by the time school started, and then just had to read for school nonstop and haven't really gotten around to this. So hopefully my thoughts are still kind of fresh. The thing that I really liked about this version, I don't actually know how it works with all the books, but I can't imagine they're all like this. There's so you get all 10 of these letters, which I'll explain what they are. I think it's 10 letters that he wrote to another gentleman named Mr. Kappas. But then you also get a chronicle, which is for every letter, it tells you where Rilke was at the time, what was going on in his life, based on, I guess he wrote a ton of letters to a ton of different people. So it kind of pieces together his life, what he was experiencing in his own writing, things that aren't necessarily present in the letters, which I thought was really cool. But anyway, basically what this is Rilke went to a military academy, which he had a horrible time at. He was kind of a smaller kid, very artistic, very sensitive, and did not do well with kind of the demands of this military school. But I guess there was one professor he enjoyed. I hope I'm getting this all right. This is all kind of recollection, but there was one professor he connected with, and this guy, Mr. Kappas, who was a student at the time that these letters are being written, knew this professor, and this professor gave him Rilke's information and said reach out to this guy. Mr. Kappas wanted to be a poet too. So yeah, basically that's what it is. I'm sure I learned his full name somewhere, but Rilke is always addressing him as Dear Mr. Kappas, so that's why I'm saying that. But these letters are absolutely fascinating. I think it's a really cool thing to read as somebody that's trying to figure out writing myself, how to pursue it, how to make time for it, how to create the best art possible, how to get better. But I also think it's really cool to read no matter if you write or not. So letter one kind of starts out with Rilke establishing that he's against any critical intentions. You can't really criticize a piece of art, he says, least of all words, especially because words can't actually express what we're feeling. So there's a lot of happy misunderstandings, he says. But he does say your poems, to Mr. Kappas, your poems aren't personal enough. They have no individual style, he says, although there's kind of the beginnings of something personal. So he really is emphasizing how much it matters to put out something that reflects you, to put out something that only you could write, and to write for that reason. So he says, you are looking outward, and that above all you should not do now. Nobody can counsel and help you, nobody. There is only one single way, go into yourself, search for the reason that bids you write. So I think that's really interesting. So much of this is really centered around solitude, discovering yourself. He also mentions if you need to find out if you're cut out for this. Rilke had a lot of struggles, and a lot of it had to do with the fact that he was a writer. So he says ask yourself in the stillest hour of your night, must I write? And if you decide you must, then build into your life according to this necessity. Your life, even into its most indifferent and slightest hour, must be a sign of this urge and a testimony to it. Then try, like some first human being, to say what you see and experience and love and lose. So give something of your own, say what you have to say, but you have to believe that you must do this. And I don't know, at one point here he says something ask yourself whether you'd have to die if you weren't allowed to write. And it's an interesting thing to think about, I guess. It's a little extreme in my eyes, but also you do have to kind of have this like deluded sense about you when you're writing, that like you have to do this, that this is the only thing that matters. Because to really create good stories or good poems or whatever, it just takes such an extreme amount of actual writing to develop into something good. It also takes such an extreme amount of personhood put into the writing. So it's an interesting thing to think about. He basically says, like, if it's not coming out of necessity, then don't do it at all. So I don't know. The letter is certainly beautiful, and you can kind of agree or disagree or whatever. But I do like the idea of not looking outward, and it just feels, a lot of these things feel so much more prevalent today. It's a lot easier to look outward now than it probably was then. It also feels a little extreme when he's like, you have to be by your, like he is talking real solitude. But I definitely think he has a point in a lot of what he's saying here. And he says, yeah, for at bottom and just in the deepest and most important things, we are unutterably alone. So nobody can advise you. The deepest and most important things, which are the things you're putting into your writing, you know, that's you and that's you alone. Again, this is all just so cool that he's just responding to a guy. I mean, I know he's from his school, but Rilke hated his time at this school. And maybe that's part of why he felt the need to respond to somebody who seems a little similar to him in terms of poetry and whatnot. But it is just fascinating that he wrote all these letters to this guy, and did that with many people. He kind of responded to, I guess you'd call it like fan mail now, but yeah, it's very cool. Another thing he discusses a lot is the idea, what I'll say, like living the questions, because that's my favorite quote in all of this. He says here, you are so young, so before all beginning, and I want to beg you as much as I can, dear sir, to be patient towards all that is unsolved in your heart, and try to love the questions themselves. Do not now seek the answers which cannot be given you, because you would not be able to live them. Live the questions now, perhaps you will then gradually, without noticing it, live along some distant day into the answer. And I think that is just the coolest. So you have to move forward and you have to live the way you know how to live, do the things you know how to do. And you might be wrong, but you can't lead with the answer to the questions that you're asking. He really focuses on how important it is to be in your mind, which is such a scary thing, at least for me, where it's just like you have to sit with all these thoughts you have. And, you know, it can be really tough. Sometimes you just want to escape that, and especially when you're kind of conditioned to escape it, when it's become so easy to kind of get out of your own head. And he's saying, like, if you want to create, you have to be in your own head. Love your solitude and the suffering it causes you. Rejoice in your growth, in which you naturally can take no one with you, and be kind to those who remain behind. Be sure and calm before them, and do not torment them with your doubts, and do not frighten them with your confidence or joy, which they could not understand. So he's really, I mean, he's trying to say, like, that's not a shot at anyone either. He's just saying you have to grow through yourself, through your own mind, through your own experiences, and don't feel like you're better than anyone for that, or worse than anyone for that. You're just you. And if the act of creation is important enough to you, you'll do these things. So it's just, I just think it's really cool. You know, I'm not one for like self-help books. I think are kind of ridiculous. Like, not all of them. I'm sure there are interesting things, but it just feels a little different because he's offering all this advice, and yet at the same time he says, I mean, where is it? Do not believe that he who seeks to comfort you lives untroubled among the simple and quiet words that sometimes do you good. His life has much difficulty and sadness and remains far behind yours. Or otherwise he would never have been able to find those words. So he's in a tough spot right now. He's always kind of sick. He has a lot of struggles. He finds it hard to write a lot of the time. I think that's the most interesting part of the book, and so maybe I won't necessarily talk about the chronicle. And I don't just want to read all the letters, because I feel like I do this so often where it's just like I just read you the book and it's like, what am I doing? But the last thing I'll really touch on is, what is this, like letter 8? He returns to that idea of staying in your own mind, of suffering, of thinking your own thoughts, no matter how hard it feels sometimes. And he says, why do you want to shut out of your life any agitation, any pain, any melancholy, since you really do not know what these states are working upon you? Since you know that you are in the midst of transitions and wished for nothing so much as to change. Sickness is the means by which an organism frees itself of foreign matter, so one must just help it to be sick, to have its whole sickness and break out with it, for that is its progress. I don't have anything better to say than what's really in the letters, and I could probably make a whole video on this book, but it's just, yeah, I think some of it seems a little extreme, but when I'm reading it, it really doesn't feel that way. It feels like it's more motivating than anything else, and a reminder of how serious some people are taking this thing that I would like to pursue myself. And you really do have to go all in and all the things like I'm experiencing right now, which is so much doubt over my writing, having a hard time like sitting down and revising longer pieces, whatever the case may be. It's cool to see someone who feels like they can both give great advice because they're doing this, but also they're really struggling themselves. Nobody ever really has it figured out. It's all kind of an act of being all in, and then going from there. And it's certainly not easy. So I think this is really cool. I'd highly recommend this. It was a little bit difficult just to read. Right now, I think if I'm going to read stuff on my own, it's got to be more, like, not easier to read, but like modern texts tend to be a little lighter, a little more enjoyable sometimes. And I'm reading so many classics that, this kind of thing isn't exactly right for me right now. But, I did finish it and I thought it was great, even the last couple letters. And I think the Chronicle is really cool to kind of learn all about where he's traveling, what's going on with him. So this would be a big recommendation for me, probably 4 stars, 5 stars. I think it's something I'll come back to for sure as well. Okay, so I think this video is probably too long already, but I think I'm going to go through both the Russian literature books I've read from my 19th century Russian lit class. The first Nabokov book I read, Illusion Defense, will be its own separate video. I think that might actually come out before this one does, so maybe that's already up. And I'm reading the second one right now, but we've already finished 2 books for 19th century Russian lit, which is A Hero of Our Time. Many of you pointed out how bad this cover is. I completely agree. It is the worst one I can imagine. I don't know what's up with it. My teacher just said it's by far the best translation that's out right now, so that probably has something to do with it, but I'm sure that you can get this translation with a different cover. I don't know. I don't tend to think about covers all that much, but yeah, this is awful. And then Eugene Onegin by Alexander Pushkin. So this one was really cool too. So this I'll talk about maybe more briefly because I read this like I finished it like a week and a half ago. We're going very fast. Like this we just read in the past week. We're reading City Folk and Country Folk over these next 6-7 days. But A Hero of Our Time was a super not confusing. It was a good book. I think if you enjoy Russian literature, it's a really cool thing to read just because it's kind of like the first Russian novel, in a sense. This is kind of this is a novel in verse, so a lot of stuff goes from here into the next Dostoevsky and Tolstoy and whatever. And Lermontov was really inspired by Pushkin. They both kind of met the same fate, died the same way in a duel, very young. Pushkin was younger though, or no, Lermontov was younger. And it's interesting because both their characters are in duels in this. So it's kind of funny. But this was written after this. We read it first, so I'm just going to talk about it real quick. So this is a story about Pechorin. And he is a man, it's told in a weird kind of perspective. So there's a couple different sections. Yeah, here. So part 1 is like Bella and Maxim Maximich. So Maxim Maximich, I said that wrong the first time, but Maxim Maximich is a man that our narrator meets, who's met Pechorin. Kind of knew him as friends, but we learned that they really aren't as close as Maxim Maximich says that they were. And so Pechorin lived under Maxim Maximich, who had a higher position in the military than he did. So they lived together for a short amount of time. And so we're hearing about Pechorin through Maxim Maximich and how Pechorin's treatment of this woman Bella was awful. So he's kind of like that Byronic hero in a way, where he is, understands how to manipulate people very well, doesn't treat them well at all, is kind of conflicted in his own head, although we don't really hear about that. So this story is told very out of order. Basically towards the end of the first part, our narrator says that after they've run into Pechorin, that he found all these papers of his, and he puts Pechorin's papers, this journal, at the end of the book. So then Pechorin's kind of explaining himself. And he's not really a better person than we thought, but he is more introspective and almost understands how kind of awful he is, understands his bad tendencies. So I don't know, this is a tough one to kind of go through. I mean, obviously I have a lot of things underlined. I might try and write an essay about it, but I don't know, it's a little more difficult. But basically, I don't think, in my opinion, I don't think people really hit the nail on the head with the point of this book. Because what it seems to me is we're getting all these fragmentations of this man, Pechorin, whether from other people, from himself as well, but only kind of part of his of his life, and he's really, and they kind of provide different, they kind of provide a juxtaposition. And I think what's going on here, and what's the most interesting part of this book to me, is you're trying to piece together this man that you can't really piece together at all. And so, is he a hero of our time for that reason? Because he's not understandable. And you don't really know what to make of him in a sense, because he goes from, having this interesting introspection. And one of my favorite quotes, I don't know if I'll be able to find it, but it was something like, "From life's storm, I have taken a couple of ideas and not one emotion." So it's this kind of idea that he just like doesn't feel anything, but also at the sense that he's kind of like bored with things. There's a lot of correlation between these two books and the character Evgeny or Eugene and Pechorin. And so I think this is a really interesting one to think about. For me, I just didn't love it as much as I was hoping I would, mainly because of that. I thought that was, in my eyes, that was the most interesting part, and I think that's what could make it great if you enjoy that kind of thing. But the idea that you're getting this picture painted of this entire man who's like a hero and very different from everyone in his time, I don't think is the case. He's clearly very intelligent in a way, but also very manipulative and not a great person. And so I think kind of exploring what makes someone like that is the interesting part of this, and the fact that he doesn't give us an answer is what makes the book for me. So I don't know. I think maybe this is something that I could read again and I would enjoy a lot more. So that could be another way to look at it. But anyway, so that is A Hero of Our Time by Mikhail Lermontov with the terrible cover. And then Pushkin's Eugene Onegin is great. I don't even know where to start with this. I feel like I have to do like whole videos on all these books, but it's just tough because I just don't have a ton of time. So I'm just trying to figure out, how to do these, because I really enjoy making these, but it's just not always the easiest with everything going on right now. So this is fascinating. I don't read a ton of poetry, but the way this is written, which is kind of in like 7 or 8 syllables each line, it's usually like 4 or 3 quartets, and then followed by like a couplet at the end. Which is always kind of a funnier sort of 2 lines. So like the way it starts off, I guess I'll just read the first one, but I don't know if you can see that. Like that's how they're formatted each page. My uncle, man of firm convictions, by falling gravely ill he's won a due respect for his afflictions, the only clever thing he's done. May his example profit others, but God, what deadly boredom, brothers, to tend a sick man night and day, not daring once to steal away. And oh, how base to pamper grossly and entertain the nearly dead, to fluff the pillows for his head and pass him medicines morosely, while thinking under every sigh, the devil take you, uncle, die. So it's interesting. When I saw novel in verse, I was like, it's going to be hard to understand, but it really isn't. If anything, it kind of has that fragmented feel of A Hero of Our Time, but I really enjoy, and this is the reason I started writing in the first place, which was mostly like songs when I was 15, 16, whatever, because I think it's so cool to try to fit so much into a small line, and the lines that stand out in poetry like this are really cool to me. And I think the fact that it really takes the time to go about things like a novel, in terms of, as Pushkin puts it, having chatter. So there's a lot of descriptions of places and like things going on that just don't exist in short stories or smaller poems. So it really does kind of feel like that. But I guess I'll kind of try and describe the plot, because I think it's something that can get a little confusing. So we have Onegin, who it opens up on. So that's him tending to his uncle, but we don't actually meet him for a while. So we have the poet, like the narrator, which is Pushkin, but kind of separate in a way, but very similar. And then we meet the character Eugene, and he is a bit of kind of similar to Pechorin, very bored with things. He's going to all these balls, seducing women, sleeping throughout the day, waking up, going to these balls at night, and he gets really bored with the social life he's leading, and so he kind of retreats from that. And then we meet Lenski, who is very social. Vladimir was his first name, so Lenski. And they kind of become friends. So Lenski's like a poet, a younger poet, and he's filled with all these kind of like, I'm going to conquer the world, like very optimistic. And Eugene finds it funny, and he kind of laughs, but he also really enjoys his presence. This kind of takes place like, post-Napoleon, when everybody is seeing them. I mean, he says, we've outgrown all sentiments and deem men zeros, except of course ourselves alone. We all take on Napoleon's features, and millions of our fellow creatures are nothing more to us than tools, since feelings are for freaks and fools. And he says of Eugene, he did respect a noble few, and cold himself gave warmth its due. So Lenski being that warmth. He smiled at Lenski's conversation, indeed the poet's fervent speech. So they're good friends. And then there's these two women, sisters, Olga and Tatiana. And Tatiana is almost another main character in the story, in a sense. And she is the sister, of Olga, like I said. Olga is this traditionally beautiful girl. She goes about, everything the right way. She's very sought after. And so Lenski begins to court her. Eugene finds Tatiana much more interesting. She spends most of her time away from the social scene, reading books and whatever the case may be. She's just a very different kind of person. And he's not exactly courting her, but he's making her fall in love with him. And that kind of happens. He's not interested in any of that. Like, everything makes him bored. Boredom is such an interesting part of this story. I mean, he's the kind of person that is almost just like Bikorin, just kind of not exactly thinks he's above everything, but literally is. Like, based on the way his emotions influence him, he like is above everything because he doesn't find any satisfaction in any of it. And so he makes her fall in love with him. He even gets to a point where he's like, I'm gonna take Olga just for the hell of it, just to mess around with Lenski. And that's what kind of leads to a duel. So he's kind of just doing things out of boredom, and the ending is really interesting. And so I think, that's about the plot as far as it goes. But the best thing about this is the writing. And I think it's really cool. I mean, it's definitely got to be really difficult to do a translation like this. Make everything rhyme, still seem very beautiful. This has got to be much further or to a greater extent translated than a novel would have to be. It has a lot of beautiful descriptions of nature. Do we mark with them? How nature's lively renovation compares with our own fading youth, for which no spring will come in truth. Talks a lot about the idea of death and youth and boredom, fitting into society, regrets. So it's just a really beautiful, I love this here. So this is when, after Eugene is kind of fleed away from Tatiana, or Tanya as she's called here, because of her love for him. She's reading his books. So this I think is really cool, and part of the reason I underline books, I like to be this is what really stuck out to me. So some pages still preserve the traces where fingernails had sharply pressed. The girl's attentive eye embraces these lines more quickly than the rest, and Tanya sees with trepidation the kind of thought or observation to which Eugene paid special heed, or where he tacitly agreed. And in the margins she inspected his pencil marks with special care, and on those pages everywhere she found Onegin's soul reflected, in crosses or a jotted note or in the question mark he wrote. I mean, this is something, it's probably 4 stars for me. The thing that I hated most about this was how fast I had to read it. The first 2 chapters I took very slowly and were just beautiful. And then as it sped up, I had to just move fast, and that's not the way you want to read this book. So I would say take your time with this. Really take in the writing. It's so wonderful. Another interesting thing about this is Pushkin kind of was putting these chapters out at all sorts of different times, and so didn't really know how it was going to end when he was writing it. Would kind of stop in the middle of something and be like, well, that's enough for today. In the poem, he'll kind of say that. At the end, he basically cuts it off with a scene where it's not really resolved in a sense. And he says, whatever reader your reaction, and whether you be foe or friend, I hope we part in satisfaction as comrades now, whatever end. Blessed is he who rightly gauges the time to quit the feast and fly, who never drained life's chalice dry, nor read its novel's final pages, but all at once for good withdrew, as I from my Onegin do. Oh, this is cool too, when he's kind of describing, but why on earth does he, Eugene, inspire so harsh and negative a view? Is it because we never tire of censuring what others do? Because an ardent spirit's daring appears absurd or overbearing, from where the smug and worthless sit? Because the dull are cramped by wit? Because we take mere talk for action, and malice rules a petty mind? Because in tripe the solemn find a cause for solemn satisfaction, and mediocrity alone is what we like and call our own? And then he goes on to say, bless who in his youth was tender, ripened in his prime, learned to bear without surrender the chill of life with passing time. Of whom the lifelong verdict ran, old X is quite a splendid man. So he's saying, Eugene screwed up. He messed up. I mean, I don't want to spoil anything, but he doesn't end up in like the situation. He has regrets and things. But at the end of the day, he didn't really, because he did what he wanted to do. And I think that this is kind of written in the tradition of Don Juan, but it's not at all the same. Eugene doesn't have the same bite as Don Juan. He's not necessarily satirical all the time. He does kind of adhere to the rules, but at the same time, you know, he goes about things his own way, and he's independent. And the thing is that the narrator, or Pushkin, is very distant from Onegin, as in, like, they know each other, but they don't agree on a lot of things. So he makes that clear. But at the same time, he has a respect for him. And this is, I mean, I would highly recommend this. I honestly want to read this again and just do it a bit slower, but this is probably 4 stars for me, I think. This and Letters to a Young Poet were both fantastic. I probably have to end this video just because that's been so much time already, and I don't want to bore you guys to death. But I have also been reading, I don't even know where it is right now, but Blacks by Gwendolyn Brooks, which I showed you guys on the 2 videos ago, or last video, for my Gwendolyn Brooks course. We've kind of read the Annie Allen book, because it compiles a bunch of different books of hers, and I really did enjoy that as well. I'm really finding it interesting to kind of get into poetry. It's also interesting to have so many references to Chicago. I think that's cool. But I will kind of talk more about her when I finish that whole collection and her biography, which I'm reading right now. Yeah, anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Hopefully there will be more in the future. I did start Intermezzo by Sally Rooney, which is a bit of a project. I did not realize how long it was going to be, but I do want to read that and kind of talk about that with you guys as well. So, been busy lately, but having a lot of fun with the stuff I'm able to read, writing as well. Hopefully I'm able to get some videos out about writing soon. And as always, thank you guys so much for watching. It means so much to me, and I'll see you guys next time.